if you could tell us about the period in hiding. When was that?
We were practically hiding all the
No,
time.
no, but I mean in the mountains.
In the forest.
In the forest.
No, this is where 1944 came in.
Oh, it was it was all the way to 1944.
All the way to 1944.
Wow.
Slovaks understood that Germans are going to lose a war, and because they were practical people, they were trying to jump on a wagon
on the
right side. On the right side, and they made a little uprising. Uprising only lasted 2 weeks, and Germans came and bombarded the hell out of Slovakia and immediately took over the whole country. They didn't trust anymore the Allies because it was a military uprising and partisans and so on. And they were coming usually in a truck with a mortar on it or machine gun, and they were progressing, and whatever moved, they killed or shooting.
This is the Germans.
Germans. And they took over Slovakia totally, completely. And this way, a lot of civilians were running into the forest, not only forest, or to the smaller villages off the main roads, which they were taking mostly main roads. And those villages, adjacent villages, they did not take over yet. And this is where most population was running because they were scared of being shot or being burned or being bombarded and so on. A lot of refugees were civilian refugees. We removed our yellow stars and we took a backpacks which we were ready those 3 years to ready to be deported or to be simply escaping and so on. And we didn't even for those years remove our shoes. We just loosened up the laces. These are we were sleeping, dressed.
So ready to
escape, ready to moment notice. And we used that opportunity to remove the yellow stars and run with those bombed out refugees, they call themselves, bombed out civilians.
But your brother had a plan?
My brother in the 1943, 44, he already had a plan because we didn't know
what was going to happen. So tell us about your brother's plan.
We had an apartment which practically anybody could come into the apartment and say, oh, I need a table or I need a cupboard. And people were pointing at it and took it. We had no legal rights, we had no human rights, we had no zero rights.
Tell us again.
The apartment was completely empty.
Right.
And it was a wooden stove in a kitchen, not wooden stove, but it was brick stove made of nothing to steal or take away.
He sketched out a plan.
He took the charcoal and on the walls of an empty wall, he designed a shelter, and we were debating it. What about breathing? What about entrance and how to camouflage it, and everything was on the wall in charcoal. And when we escaped, the Germans took over our apartment, soldiers, and they saw how we are going to hide.
Yeah.
But it was thought out to the smallest detail. And in wintertime, it was 1, 2, or sometimes even 3 feet.
So you built this shelter. You had a shovel, is that right? And
we had a very little trench shovel I picked up when the soldiers were running from the Germans, because they had it like trench shovel. And I had a little hatchet behind my belt. This was my personal protection, my tool, and I was a little bandit, a little Mowgli, they called me.
And did you? Who built the shelter?
All of us. We built mostly. We were 3 men, but grandfather was already 70, which means he didn't contribute too much. we
So
two
you
of us
built
and
this
my father.
shelter, and how large was the shelter?
Shelter was would fit 6 people, but not laying on the back, just on the side.
So you built this shelter in a couple of weeks, and then you all went there
We all
to hide.
vanished. We vanished, and
And went into hiding.
people parachuted from Soviet Union, parachuted on politicians or soldiers, parachuted to the Slovak territory to fight the Germans, and they had in the forest camps but they were all anti-Semitic and they were killing Jews, just the same as the Nazis.
So you had it from both ends.
We
But
had it
so
from
you
both.
moved into this shelter.
Yes.
When was that?
It was in September 1944.
So the snows were there or no yet?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Snow came in November.
And there was a little stream, I think, strategic.
It was chosen on a side. It was like a 2 sides of a hill and a very tiny, about 1 foot wide, which grew or shrank depending on the rain or melting snow. Warm days were large and so on. And we cut a triangle into the slope on one side, and this is where we built the shelter. We camouflaged it and squeezed in it, and we believed that we would survive somehow those few weeks.
Yeah, a few weeks. This was all, yeah.
And it was September 1944, and we crawled out of it first week of April 1945.
So that was how many
7 months later.
7 months. So what was
About
just a 2-week plan
200
to
days.
survive this?
2-3 weeks plan turned into 7 months, 200 days.
Somehow.
And it was and we were even robbed by those parties.
Yeah, so tell us about that.
The Soviet parties.
But your role again was to go out at night and find food and.
I was the most capable of those physically capable, and I wouldn't call it brave, but simply
daring,
very daring.
No fear.
No fear, because people were. My brother feared death. My father, accepted whatever was happening. Very religious. My grandfather saying God wants us to do this, and this is what.
This is our fate.
Like others call it karma. Karma. It was like a predestined, intention. And my mother said that no. Hitler and Tissot, he was president of the country. Hitler wants us to be dead. God wants us to live and resist those bastards. This is what she was saying. And this were, my wobbling philosophy between resisting or flow with this.
Yes. Flowing with a path.
Don't resist. Don't swim against the stream. And my mother said, no, we are going to, which means that this is how we survived it. All that psychology has been more important sometimes than and the mood and the courage was more important than physical strength or conditions or food or whatever.
And so you would go out and find food, and even in the winter.
They were mostly bushes, but snow was very high. Average was about 2 feet. I made huge holes in the snow, and I put snow in behind me so that it covers so that nobody would see that a human being walked through the forest. And those bushes were taller than the snow, and winter came there from one moment to another. It was some kind of a fall, and then snow fell and frost, but they were really deep frost, not like around the freezing point. They were much deeper. And all those berries on the trees and mushrooms and vegetation under the snow remained like in a
frozen.
Like
frozen food.
Like in a fridge. Perfect. And this is what
fresh.
First of all, I went under the snow, and there were leaves, and we knew which leaves were edible.
Oh, really?
They were tiny strawberries, maybe quarter of an inch or smaller, frozen, but they were not too many. But the leaves, I ate the green stuff. I brought them, to chew, and mostly they were berries. They were about 5 or 6 different kind of berries. Some of them sweet, some of them very bitter, but edible. And I knew which ones were poisonous, and I ignored them. And they were mushrooms, edible, because they grow on trees. They are very few, if at all, poisonous mushrooms on trees. Like shiitake. And so on. And I knew exactly, because I spent there, all my life, and the forest was, like all over. Which means that we built a shelter, and
so here you are in the shelter. If you can just take us back there, and what was going through your mind and others' minds as you're just all day in this dark? It was very dark. There was just a tube for air, right? There was.
It was like a very stiff air, because but it was practically, porous, because it was built of wooden, like tree trunks fallen off, and was zigzagged, and there were branches on the top of it, and soil, and then snow was over it, which means that we could breathe. And it was an opening, maybe 1.5 feet, through which we crawled in and out, because we were skeleton skinny. It was very easy for each of us, even grandfather, who was a tall man, could get through it. And it was open, and it was a little draught, but it was minimum light.
So you would stay there for hours on end in this
24 hours,
24 hours, and
sometimes.
And what was going through your mind, if you could take us while you were just?
Each mind is different.
Of course, but let's take your mind.
My mind was totally different from all the others. My grandfather and father had mostly believed in God and in miracles, and they believed that we wake up one morning and Americans will be all over. And I said, how could Americans come to this forest? And he said, by airplane.
But can I ask you, there you are, okay, let's say you're there for even a full day, just by yourself. What were you thinking about? What was, you were sleeping most of the time?
No, it was because we were absolutely hungry, under malnutrition is not the right word. It was starvation. We were exhausted to the last maybe 10% of blood needed to circulate, and oxygen to process, and tuberculosis after the war.
Yes. So what again? If you can take us back to
Which means, but I was thinking, just biologically, if I was thinking at all, and I probably, and I didn't have any secular, moral, ethical problems. They tried to kill me, and I tried to protect myself.
Again, if I'm sorry, but if you can just, because it's almost, it's so beyond the range of just regular human functioning. So while you're there, are you thinking about how to get more food, or are you thinking about this is miserable? Well, you understand what on just hour after hour, do you remember kind of what's going through your head?
It was mostly just waiting, and it was, I would call it, hallucinating. The mind was working by itself, and a hungry mind produces different thoughts than than functioning mind. It was I started remembering I had pigeons. I loved animals. I had pigeons, and naturally militiamen, fascists came and took them. We were not allowed as Jews to have any animal. One of those things were that cats and dogs and whatever it. And I remember that I didn't like rice for some reason. I just very few things I didn't like to eat. And I had a fistful of rice and they came and they were eating from my hand. They were like, they knew me and we were like friends. I talked to them and they talked to me.
Nice.
And when I was hungry and to the level of starvation, to the level of dying, that fist of rice came to hunt me. That I gave pigeons rice. They might have been probably 30, 40 grains, not more. And this was, I remember, it was like a crime I have committed. If I had that rice, I gave that to pigeons. And there were things like that. But then I started hearing those voices because you start hallucinating. And those voices started, questioning me and giving me advice. And I don't know what was my own mind playing games or some food or something going on from outside. But it was I believe that everybody had that communication with somebody, as I did. And if I had at all any thinking beyond my own biological needs and survival and remembering food I ate, and because most of starving people think of food. Most things, if you ask prisoners from those camps where they kept hard labor requiring 2,500 calories per day, they gave them 600, and in 3-4 months they all died because they got skinny and they got disease and typhoid and whatever, and they succumbed to. And it was one way of killing people. Dachau was that way. And I had that same thought, like of biological, food and or water. So water was not so difficult because we just reached a piece of ice or snow and ate it. And that voice then started becoming stronger and stronger, talking to me and trying to take apart all my life experiences and slicing it up into smaller pieces and say, you see how you misbehaved here, how you hated your aunt because she criticized you because you were a bad boy and she was like 19 years old. And which means that, but mostly it was just like the difference between meditation and contemplation is the contemplation you watch your thoughts. Meditation, you try to control it and give it a structure. This was mostly contemplation, watching your brain, which was deprived of oxygen naturally because it was not enough space and enough supply, and deprived of nutrition and body needs. And it produced all kinds of fascinating images. But
again, everything is so rich here. But okay, so tell us about when that amazing incident when the partisans came and they caught you outside, I guess.
They caught us outside.
This is the partisans. This is from.
They were Ukrainians.
Who were fighting.
Red Army partisans parachuted into Slovakia.
What happened that you were discovered?
It was a night already in February. Germans were losing the war, and it was obvious that the end for them is near. They were desperate. So were Soviets. They wanted to finish it, but Germans resisted. They let Americans a little bit more. They resist the Americans a little bit less, but the Russians, they were scared of that the Russians would. They started believing in their propaganda. The Bolsheviks would come and kill them all, and it was not so. No, they didn't even keep the East Germany functioning, and they were real Germans, and they kept them.
But let us get back to the partisans.
Partisans discovered us in a forest. It was a.
So the partisans were part of the were from.
Partisans were parachuted behind the enemy line. They had a camp, big camp. I don't know, hundreds of people in the middle of a forest. Germans were sometimes coming, and they were not only Germans, they were in the area where Hungarians and Romanian fascists in German uniforms. And they knew if Russians or Soviets, or at that time they were called Red Army, if they get them, they would execute them or make them life very miserable in some Soviet gulags far away. And they counted on that they would not survive, which means they were fighting to the last drop, to the last moment, and they were desperate.
Either way, they would die. They knew that.
Yeah, they knew they would die either in a battle, defending. Every day they were able to drag on with their life was a bonus. But we were in that forest just the same, because we knew that every day, many times, somebody can walk by and be suspicious and give the location to the authorities. Or no. Anyway, it was a night where we crawled out, and suddenly we were surrounded by armed men, and we saw those drums on their automatic weapons and their Soviet equipment, but they were claiming they were from the Bender army. It was a General Bender, a Ukrainian, who produced an army of Ukrainians fighting next to Germans fighting the Soviet Union, fighting the Red Army. And they came surrounding us saying, "We are Bender Army," and we knew the Bender Army was Nazi army, which was, because they would not try to be recognized as Soviet, as a Red Army, because they were strictly forbidden to attack civilians or harm civilians, because they needed support of local population. They came to liberate the area from Nazis rather than to alienate them, which means that this was the introduction. Then they came, then they recognized immediately we were Jews in the middle of the forest. We were not shaved.
Right.
No, I didn't have hair yet, but facial hair, but my brother, father, and it was obvious who we were. And they said, "Give us money, give us gold, give us dollars," very specifically. And we said, "We don't have any. Even if we had possibly a few years before, something like of that nature, we were exhausted totally.
Everything was gone.
Everything was gone, and they were demanding it and saying, okay, which means that what's your last?" They went, 3 of them went into the, I don't know, it's 3 or 2, doesn't matter, but they went into that shelter, crawled in, and went through our stuff, believing that we still have some money or jewelry or something. And they found nothing. They came out and said, okay, what's your last wish? Because one of them was guarding us. While he was guarding us, we were standing around, and he had that weapon, that automatic weapon with a drum. And I told my mother, I would walk behind that guy. He had only a canvas hat. It was a warm February night, it was a warmer night. He didn't have the fur hat or some helmet or anything. And I said, I whispered my mother, I will go behind him and take my hatchet, split his head, take his weapon, put it in that hole, kill the others who were inside, and we will solve our problem. And my mother whispered back, do you know how to shoot that weapon? She was not doubting that I would split his head. Because she knew me. I was bringing food and she was interrogating me, trying to find out where I got it. And I would never tell her. It was just I risked my life or I broke the law or something. But she couldn't do anything. I was a bad boy and she took me as... Now I remember that she would not doubt me to kill the guy. But she would doubt that I would be able to manipulate that weapon. And I said, I don't know, I figured it out somehow. Let me handle it because it doesn't look like you right. And we only had few words and few whispers, because the guy was standing there and he might have understood. And he just was a suspicious, but he didn't believe that we would do anything to him because they didn't behave like we would be able to do something like that. And particularly a boy, I looked like 10 years old, and I was 14. I'm still small. Anyway, when they came out and said, "What's your last wish?" and my father said, let us pray a few minutes and
before you kill us.
Yeah. And they put the tefillin on and the talis on, and Jews are buried in those things, and they had it with them. And they said prayers, and my father said, okay, kill us, don't torture us here, don't get it over with. And my mother started shouting, why would you kill my children? Why would you? What did we do to you? We are not your enemies, or simply she started explaining to them, because my mother spoke Russian. She was a teacher, French, Russian, Hungarian, German, you name it. And they were, laughing mostly, very relaxed. And, there was weapons, loaded weapons, and again, my father, get it over with. Don't do, torture us here. Don't make big fuss out of it. And my mother again, don't. My mother was shouting. My father was resigned.
Again, that dynamic between them.
Yeah. And it was, there are moments in life you will never forget. And those few moments which were going on through those minutes, we are intensely carved into my memory. And it was very, very critical. And I was just ready to fight and survive at any cost. Even if I died, I would die fighting. It was that kind of nature. And when I saw that they are already, lifting their weapons, because when my mother said I would take care of it, I took a better position. It was a fallen tree, and I took a position behind it, in front of it. And when they lifted the weapons, I jumped over, and somebody gave a signal for us to disperse, because it was like I'm going to be dead in a few moments. Then everybody jumps, everybody ran, tried to run.
Oh, everybody ran
Everybody ran, but it was icy, it was slow, and they told me later, because I didn't know, that they all slid down back into, and none of them escaped except me. And as I jumped over and started zigzagging, they started shooting at me.
Wow.
And they were shooting, and the trees were falling, branches were falling to my eyes, and I heard that, it was an automatic weapon. And I zigzagged between the trees and ran away, and went straight to that village where I knew it was a house where partisans lived.
Are you surprised that they didn't hit you?
No, you
You
don't
were
think.
fast. No, I know, but now in retrospect, because here all they're firing at you.
No, I was prepared.
Yeah. So
No,
you were
it
fast.
was a big fallen tree, and I jumped behind it. I was ready.
So you already had it planned.
I knew how to do it because it was not first time
Yeah.
I was in danger like
I
that.
understand. You escaped to this village.
Yeah, and I knew that partisan, the chief of them, who was my friend before, and he was in the village when we were still there, in August, September. And I asked him, we were hiding in the forest, and a group of people came and they spoke Russian, and they said they were Ukrainians, and he started telling me something like, was one wearing a leather hat, and one had a scar, and the third was a mustache. And I thought myself, how come he knows them? They are not
From the army.
from the Bender army. They must be partisans.
Yeah.
Because he didn't know that I didn't tell him that it was Bender army. I thought a man, and I asked him, can you give me a gun, few bullets, and I bring it back to you, but I would follow snow. I would
Try to kill them.
Try to kill them one by one. I would follow their footsteps. It's very clear where they went and how they came, and he did not give me any gun. He was trying to excuse this and that, but I didn't tell him I recognized that they were partisans because it was part. But it was a conflict, little conflict, internal conflict between the Soviet, the Red Army and the local partisans.
Yes.
Because the Soviets felt superior, and they had all the intelligence, and they had all, much higher net of information because they were a huge army of a huge system of fighting the Nazis, and Slovak partisans were just local peasants, mostly young boys and girls who were playing heroes and so on. And when something serious happened, they were just playing they run away and so on. But this was a brave guy, and he really was telling me, I put you into my group, and all I can do for you is to offer you, because it was about midnight, or to 1 a.m. or something, you can get into the hay, into the attic, and in the morning report to me, and I put you into. And I told myself, first time they spot me, it would be my last few seconds of my life. And they said, okay, I would do it. I climbed there, and when everything calmed down, I just came down and very quietly vanished, and then on my belly, it was February, it was some kind of warmer weather, and it was a plowed field, and there were those black mud lines, and the snow and mud lines And in that mud line, I was crawling into the forest from the other side of the
Wow.
forest. I
What
expected,
a survivor
I
you
expected,
are.
yeah, I expected them to wait for me,
Yeah,
to kill me,
yeah.
you know, because they witnessed something. They had the death penalty. They were shooting them on the spot.
Yeah.
I saw after the war soldiers who were stealing something, and an office. The people told, you know, this guy stole this and so on.
Right.
The officer pulled a gun and shot him
Shot.
dead, and he fell on the floor in
Right.
front of me. You know, they were so strict not to irritate the local population, and we were local civilians. Which means that they are guarding their own, you know, political, whatever, you know, image
Mm-hmm.
of a liberator rather
Yes.
than of an occupier. And it was a very thin line between that. And simply I ran back on my belly and tried to reach it. And when I heard in the forest, you know, my mother shouting, Bor T, instead of Tibor,
Oh,
because she knew that they could have got some documents and found out that my name was Tibor, or they might have I might have believed that they tortured them to tell my name. And if she was calling Tibor, I would not believe her.
Ruse.
And I just very carefully approached them, and I found them, and my mother gave up on me. She believed I was gone. But anyway, when I came back, I saw them standing barefoot, you know, in the snow,
Because they
in
had
their
taken,
underwear.
they took everything.
And they took absolutely everything. They didn't need, you know, blankets. They didn't need our backpacks. They didn't need our food, you know, the berries and things like that. They didn't need that. But they took it, obviously, to either starve us to death, to freeze us to death, because they took men's clothes and they simply left us in a forest. They were shooting, and they knew that if there were some German patrols around, they heard the shooting, and they might have come to investigate, and they were footsteps, and they would have found us. And it was a death penalty. Without killing us, we would have been dead anyway.
Yeah.
Which means that this was their intention, to wipe out witnesses without obviously leave bullets in our heads. Because even after the war, it could have been obvious who did that.
Yeah.
Because Russian bullets were different from Germans. And now what to do? The war was not over yet. It was February. We didn't know how long it would take, but it took another 2 months. And that time we were thinking, you know, if we go to the village, you know, like to get some you know, food or whatever, it would be, it might be those soldiers, you know, the Germans, or they were Hungarians, the Romanians there too. And they might, you know, the patrol might be close. And
either way, you lose.
Yeah, you lose. If we don't go, we freeze. If we don't, you know, get some food, we die. Which means that this was February, and we were standing there, you know, exposed, footsteps all over, because they left. Now we didn't know if they come back. You know, as soon as, you know, they might have decided, you know, to leave and then come back to shoot us. Anyway, we decided, it started snowing. First thing was, you know, for good, it was a God wants us to live, because it wiped out all the footsteps. This was number one. They wouldn't find us anymore at the second time. It was very dense forest, we were huge forest. Second thing happened that when we were digging we didn't notice it before, but at night we noticed the whole cave, the whole hole which we dug out started smelling like sulfur, like rotten eggs. And it was a mineral water we knew in the surrounding spas. There were 4 spas close by. And they all used that mineral water as a healing water. And we used to go to get, it was like a hole where we were taking water, and when we had stomach problems, we were drinking it as healing water. And that water erupted in the middle of our shelter and started
That night.
That night, and that stream started going into that little tiny stream of water which was in the bottom of the valley, going between those 2 slopes, where one of slope we had the shelter about 2 feet above that level, and it warmed up that area. It was just a totally miracle,
Miraculous,
like biblical miracles, where it's not fighting laws of nature, but it's in timing. And the timing was so perfect that it protected us from and
it is amazing.
And I continued then carrying those berries and so on, and it started warming up a little. It was not so difficult, I didn't have to. There were a lot of spots already which were not covered with snow. I jumped from one to another. They never came back, those partisans. But we heard a story long after the war. Within a year, people are coming to see us and so on. Those partisans came, we were our friends before. And it was my sister, I was 14, my sister was 12. One of those partisans was in love with my sister. And he was in the camp with the Russians. And when he came to that camp, they came in the camp with our backpacks and saying, we found out Jews, and we almost killed them, and we just took everything from them, they would die and so on. That boy who liked us, who was a friend, he went after them. How could you do this? Or, something like that. They pulled out a gun and shot him.
Shot him,
killed him. He's a friend of Jews. Which means that they believed that they were. Anyway, which means that this is what we heard a few months after we were, after the liberation. And it was another very educational thing, that not all your friends are friends. Not everybody who liberates you did it because he loved you.
You went from the mouth of the lion to the mouth of the tiger.
That's correct. Which means that it was a very important education, because we were praying for Soviets for liberate us, and suddenly we found out that
they liberated you to enslave you.
Which means that it was and now
amazing,
it was
right?
very important to know to survival. Then we saw the guy who robbed us, because we had several layers on us. And my father had the pajamas, and very distinguished, they are different colors and different stripes. And we saw that guy who robbed us. I remember standing with my father on a corner, watching, what's happening. Everything, was boarded because it was after the war shooting. People were trying to save their windows and glass and stores from looting and suddenly we saw this guy who was robbing us in pajamas, drunk, and he was a military chief of that area, Dolny Kubin. I don't know if he was a political or military, But he was parading himself in my father's pajamas. He robbed us in that forest.
Oh.
Because, it was a Sochi, it was a very famous spa where they were walking like that, pretending to be kurort, it's called like a spa.
Did he recognize you? Or?
No,
No.
no, we were already washed and because we were all muddy and so on. If he recognized us, he would have killed us. But we very carefully turned around, very slowly, and walked very slowly around the corner and ran like crazy. And we went to say, "Be careful! Don't show yourself."
Wow.
So to those military chiefs.
Amazing, really. Wow.
Yeah, there were many other.
So your struggle was not over.
No, struggle was not over because then you know how curious I was, and I was very swift. The tuberculosis didn't bother me at all.